Good to see you, man. Everything going good?
Yeah, yeah,
Uh, a little bit has changed over the past, well, it's been about 10 or 11 months since we did a podcast last, but a little bit has changed over that time, I would say. What do you think?
yeah, definitely.
How's the business been for you? I mean, what I wanted to really address and talk with you about today is like pivoting, because I know a lot of guys are dealing with pivoting and changing, and there's a lot of uncertainty and variables. So I'm really curious to see how you guys at Echelon Front have pivoted, because I think that'll help give some insight into how other guys might be able to pivot in their own lives.
Yeah, so I think we had 37 events. And by events, I mean, us meeting with clients. We have a leadership consulting business. We go and teach companies leadership. We had, and 99.9% of the work that we did is or was live, meaning I get on an airplane, I fly to New York, I fly to Chicago, I fly to San Francisco, I go into buildings, I meet with leaders, I talk to them about leadership, and that's what everyone on the Echelon Front team is doing. We're doing it all the time. We're doing, whatever, 100 events a month, 100 of these evolutions a month. So whenever it hit, I forget the date, in 4 days we canceled, or in 4 days, clients canceled 37, I think it was 37 events of us going live to places. And I just, okay. And we got on a call with the team and I said, hey, everybody, here's what's going on. We can't travel. And we could hold our breath until this is over. We've got Echelon Front's made some good money. We're smart how we spend it. We've got a lot of money in the bank. And I said, we could just go on a breath hold until we get through this, or we can go on the attack and we can start making things happen. And that's exactly what we did. We immediately re-engaged. We started doing everything over the internet. We doubled or tripled down on our online training platform, EF Online. We rebooted that entire system, and we just launched and came out of the gate and started going after it. And it's been awesome. It's been great. There's there's actually extensive advantages to this new world.
No
One of
doubt.
them being, this is the most consecutive nights I've ever spent with my wife. So we've been married for 23 years. This is the most consecutive nights I've ever spent with my wife. And that's by a long shot now.
Right, right.
So yeah, so that's been awesome. But also, just from a client perspective, someone's paying me a lot of money to get in a plane, fly to New York, spend the night there, wake up, meet with them, meet with their team, spend some time with them, but then get in the plane and fly back. So they're basically paying me a lot of money to travel.
Right.
And now, instead of just paying me to travel, they're still paying me the same money, but now I can say, yeah, I'll do 2 hours with you this day, 2 hours this day, and 2 hours that day. And all of a sudden they're getting 5 times the amount of time with me for the same price point. And I actually am, pretty close to the same amount of time that I have to invest in traveling all over the place. So and then on top of that, if I'm talking to 200 people in a classroom or in a lecture hall, well, then those 200 people, they're what, 20 feet, 40 feet, 100 feet away from me. They can't see me, they have bad vision, whatever. But on a Zoom call, I'm 8 inches from you, I'm 8 inches from you. And so people are seeing me, and then they can ask questions, and the questions pop up in the chat room, and everyone gets to express their opinion. And so there are some serious advantages to how we're doing this. And coming out of this, we will end up with a hybrid model where we will be doing a lot of our training online, not because it's easier, but because it's more effective, more cost efficient, and gives a better service to the client. So, I mean, will we still do live things? Yes, we will. As I explained to the Echelon Front team, I said, just because I listen to, music on MP3 doesn't mean I'm not going to a live concert when,
Yeah.
when a band comes to town. I can still, there's still a a reason for that. There's still a live component. And so we will certainly still do this stuff live, but we also will be doing a lot of this stuff virtually because it is an effective training tool.
You know, I think a lot of these things too give you another tool in the tool belt, right? And sometimes your hand is forced, or in a lot of cases, you don't even know it's available until your back's against the wall and you're like, oh shit, I gotta pivot here. Like I gotta do something. What are we gonna do? And all of a sudden you start seeing these paths and these outlets that it's not that they weren't there. It's just that you didn't see them before because your back wasn't against the wall. And I think what a lot of guys do when they get in these difficult situations is they focus on all of the negative, like, oh, this isn't going to happen, and this is going to change, and this is going to suck, and this is just going to take my time. And what I'm hearing you say is, no, wait, there's actually some positive benefits, and you specifically individually will be better served. Your clients will be better served. Your team will be better served because of everything else that's going on, and people tend to look at that in a negative way.
Yeah, and the other nice thing about it is it has forced people to jump over the hurdle of online video teleconferencing. So, for instance, I had Easter dinner with my mom and dad and my family, even though my parents were in Montana, because we did it via Zoom. Because now everybody is doing all these meetings on Zoom. So, whereas before, if I was to say to a client in New York, hey, how about we do a Zoom meeting? They'd kind of, oh, well, I don't know. What is that? How does it work? Is it really effective? Now everyone's doing it. And so people are like, hey, don't even come out here. Let's do a Zoom meeting. They know they know the power is there. So it's been educational to the entire world in a very short period of time. The whole world has been educated in the power and the effectiveness of these tools. So yeah, it's awesome, and you can definitely look at it in a negative way, or you can look at it and say, good, let's rock and roll.
Why do you think people resist the change? Because I know they do. Like I've been there. I've been stubborn, or look at change. You've got to invest some time and some resources and energy into pivoting and changing. Is it more than that, or is it simply just, I don't know, laziness? What is it?
It's path of least resistance. I'm just going to keep doing what I'm doing until, no one likes change. We have to overcome change all the time. Well, I'm speaking from a leadership perspective, working with companies at Echelon Front. They go through situations where they have to change, and they need to lead through change. And so, yeah, it's hard to lead through change because human nature is, I just want to stay the same. I want to stay status quo. I want to keep on the same course I've always been on.
One of the things that I appreciate about what you do, and then of course having a friendship with your business partner who's literally right down the road from me at this point, Pete, is you guys aren't waiting for things to happen to you, right? There's like reaction, which is what a lot of people are in right now, reaction mode, or you're in responsive mode. I don't know if that's necessarily the right term, but where it's like, all right, let's get out ahead of this thing. Instead of waiting back and thinking, okay, this happened, so I got to pivot. It's like, what can we do to stay out ahead of it? And I think that's one thing both of you guys do extremely, extremely well, especially having a personal interaction with Pete almost on a daily basis.
Yeah. You talked about being reactive. The opposite of reactive is proactive, right? So
right.
There's some interesting terms, what we always say and what I've written about is default aggressive, meaning my default mode is going to be to get aggressive and make things happen. The Marine Corps, I just talked about this on my podcast. The Marine Corps released a new document, a new field manual called Learning. And one of the things that they say that they are trying to teach Marines is a bias for action, which is the same thing as being proactive or default aggressive. A bias for action means I'm leaning towards taking action. Default aggressive means I'm leaning towards taking action. I'm not necessarily going to do it. You can override your default mode, right? If you got your default mode on your computer and you want to override it, you do. Sometimes you don't want to go to the default mode. And sometimes it's not the best thing to take action. But most likely, it is. The majority of the time, it's better to take action. And the more you sit around and wait for things to unfold, the more reactive you become, the more problems you're going to have.
Yeah, and I think when we get into reactive situations, whether it's, hey, I lost my job, or COVID-19's got me down, or my wife's considering leaving, that's when we tend to get overly emotional. And I say overly emotional because I don't think emotions are bad. I think they're there as a metric, an indicator. You ought to take them into consideration. But it's when we rely solely upon emotion that we end up making decisions that aren't in our best interest because we're not taking other factors into consideration as we press forward.
Yes, it is not a good idea to make emotional decisions. Put your emotions in check, calm down, take a step back, breathe, be logical. Don't make emotional decisions. We don't make good emotions when we're emotional. We don't make good decisions when we're emotional.
You know, the other thing you talked about with the Marine Corps, and I haven't seen this, their new manual called Learning, you said it was? Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Is there requires a certain element of, and I can't remember exactly where this falls into your, what you talk about, but your decentralized command. Maybe it's your 4 laws of combat. I don't know exactly, again, where it falls into, but your decentralized command. Because I think what a lot of men are looking for is to be led and unfortunately be told what to do. And if you buy into that, like waiting for somebody to give you permission and not having some element of decentralized command, then your default mode might be passive, waiting for Jocko or waiting for your boss or waiting for somebody to give you a command before you start taking action.
Yeah, it's just initiative, and initiative is a key part of decentralized command. Yes, decentralized command is the 4th law of combat. It's really, of the 4, it's the most powerful. It doesn't fall into line unless you have the other 3, dialed in. But that what you're talking about is initiative. And you are correct. There are some people that have been trained, conditioned, or they have a natural instinct that lends them towards, I'm going to wait to be told what to do. There's also situations that unfold that create that attitude with people. They get overwhelmed. They're not sure what's happening. You could walk into a bad situation and everyone can kind of be shocked. And if you say, hey, you 2 get over on that wall, you 2 hold security over there, you 3 start handling these prisoners, everyone's going to do it. And these could be people that have not a lot of initiative normally, but they get overwhelmed. So we got to train people so that they have initiative, so that their instinct is to take action. That's why we talk about it all the time. That's why the Marine Corps put it in that document and that's the thing that you are wanting for subordinate members of your team, for superior members of your team, for your peers. You want everyone saying, okay, what can I do? How can I take action? How can we move forward?
I think one of the traps that I fall into as a leader, whether that's within our organization or even as a father, is I get very good at barking commands, right? Like, do this, do that, follow this, do it this way. And what I'm realizing is that I'm thinking about this specifically in the context of my children, that I miss a lot of opportunity to just back up and let them.
Hey, hold on. Sorry, restart that question. You froze like halfway through that question, so I lost you.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
No worries. I think I don't know. We're having a weird internet connection, so it is what it is. We'll splice it all together. I think what the trap that I fall into, especially as a father, I think about it in my organization too, but as a father, I notice that I get really good at like barking commands, like do this, do it this way, do it that way. And what I have failed in the past to realize is that although I might get some compliance by barking those commands, I'm missing an opportunity to let my kids flounder through it a little bit, but also figure it out on their own and let them exhibit and develop some leadership characteristics because they're not worried about dad barking orders at them. Does that make sense?
It absolutely makes sense. And you're just hitting the kind of tip of the iceberg when it comes to barking orders. When you bark orders at your kid or your employee or whoever, does that improve your relationship with them or does it deteriorate the relationship?
It deteriorates.
I
think the trap that we fall into those, we think that, oh, because they did it, it worked. But It doesn't mean that actually worked in the long haul.
Yeah, it's a short-term solution, and the long-term outcome is you have people that don't like you, don't respect you, don't trust you, and they're looking for the first opportunity to rebel against you or sabotage what you're doing. So barking orders is never good. Although, as you heard me say earlier, there are scenarios that unfold sometimes where people broadly are overwhelmed. And what you need to do is step up and make things happen. And yes, that might include barking some orders to get things to happen immediately in a dynamic situation. And, I talked about this in leadership strategy and tactics, when to step up and lead. And when to step up and lead as a leader is something that's, people don't pay attention to it, but you want to pay attention to it, because if you come home and everyone in your family is doing what they're supposed to be doing, and everyone's, dinner's getting made, and, the kids' rooms are clean, and, the yard work is done, and things are going the way they're supposed to be going. Well, and then you come in there and start to impose on that situation. That's not good. There's no reason for you to step up and lead. The team is handling it. So oftentimes we try and impose our leadership when it's not necessary. And so you have to learn to pay attention and look for when there's an actual leadership vacuum where there's no leadership happening. And that's when you can step in and you can start making decisions and at least start pointing in the right direction. You don't necessarily have to start barking orders. Again, unless it's a dynamic emergency situation or a critical situation, then you might have to bark a couple orders. But other than that, much of the time, if you're doing a good job broadly as a leader, your troops are going to lead themselves and you don't have to say a damn thing.
Yeah, I think the power in this comes when you don't unnecessarily use tools, because if you continue to use the same tool over and over again, you diminish some of its power. And if you're leading effectively in other areas of your life, when you actually bark orders, I think people are going to say, oh, like something's different. I better listen this time, because you've built up credibility and authority and trust through your other actions, that when you do, on the rare occasion, have to bark some orders, people actually toe the line and listen because of what you've done to build the authority and credibility.
Yeah, this is, I often talk about leading with the minimum force required. And that's what you want to do. I also always say the less you talk, the more people listen. And I give the example that, when I was a task unit commander and task unit bruiser, I would rarely talk on the radio because there's activities happening. But when I did talk on the radio, it was like instant compliance from everybody, because everybody knew that if I was talking, it needed to happen now. So yes, this is an accurate assessment.
I think you've also done, just in hearing you say that, and I hadn't considered this before, you've actually done this on social media pretty well also, in that it doesn't seem like you feel the need to continue to post and post and post and post things that, aren't relevant or don't matter. And that way, when you actually post something, people are like, oh, okay, I better tune in. I better watch this Monday morning video that Jocko has, because he's not posting every 2 minutes. He's only posting when necessary, or he actually has something to share.
Yeah, I guess so. I'm not sure I'm the best person to talk about social media, because I don't think I really have the best, I don't focus on it a lot. I kind of do what I do, and I'm not super engaged in any way, saying like, oh, how does this post work or whatever. I just kind of do what I do, and it is what it is.
So, I mean, let's take that example, because you talk about it in a passive way, like, yeah, I just do it when I feel like it, but at the same time, like, you've got to have a reason for doing it, right? Like there is some strategy behind it, or some thought process about, hey, let me post this Monday morning video.
I originally got on social media because Tim Ferriss said I should get on social media. He seemed like he was and he is a smart guy that was like, hey, no, you should do this. It's a good way to interact with people. You can learn things. You'll get connected to people that you wouldn't otherwise be connected to. And, I was, institutionalized my whole life in the military. So I have no comprehension of the business world or anything else. And so here's this guy, Tim, who's, a successful guy, a smart guy. And he's telling me, hey, you should go on Twitter. And I said, okay. And so I went on Twitter, and the very, the day that I had it, the day that I started it or whatever, I woke up in the morning and I just, I was thinking the day before, I'm thinking, well, what would I even put on this? And I just woke up in the morning, I took a picture of my watch, I posted that. People were like, oh, that's cool, whatever. And then I just kept doing it. And it's, it's, people kind of respond, hey, cool, right on, I'm up too, get after it, whatever. So that's how that started. There was no strategy behind that. I don't even really remember the Monday thing. And it's weird too, because I think Monday is a common, like, people do stuff
Right.
Monday
Let's
mornings or
start the
whatever.
week, right?
Yeah. And so I didn't really, I wasn't even aware of that. Otherwise I probably wouldn't have done it, because I would have thought, oh, people got this covered down. But I just started making some videos on Mondays. And yeah, so now I just do it. I guess more than anything else, and I guess the root of my answer is that I am a creature of habits. I do what I do. Follow my specific patterns in life. When I establish a new pattern, I stick with it. And that's probably, as stupid as that is, that's probably the reason why you see the consistent, normal, sort of repetitive posts that I post on social media.
I mean, you say as stupid that is, but really it's only stupid if it doesn't work, right? And from my perspective, your habits have seemed to have worked to some degree.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm always trying to improve my habits, of course. And when I find habits that are negative, then I try and correct them and get them to be pick up or add a positive habit, for sure.
When because I know Tim Ferriss, Rogan, those guys were early influences on you in starting the podcast. Uh, was what was your intention? They came to you and said, "Hey, you should start a podcast. You should do this." What was your intention behind? Yeah, I think that is something I would like to do, and then launching into that space.
I When I was a kid growing up, I listened to radio shows. And I don't know if you listen to any radio shows growing up, but I always had an ear for, and I enjoyed listening to radio shows. I mean, this is in the late 70s, early 80s, or I'd say through the 80s, before I joined the Navy. There was no internet, there was no podcast, obviously. But there was radio shows where you could follow stories, you could listen to stories. And I always had an ear for that. And so that's what as soon as I started listening to podcasts, that's what it reminded me of. And the other thing that was nice about it from the get-go was there was no time limit. There's no restrictions. You can do whatever you want. It's pure freedom, to be honest with you. And so I like to do what I like to do. And as soon as, I was talking about this with Echo the other day, he wasn't really sure what the podcast was going to be like. He kind of had an idea, but I knew from day one what I was going to do. And, like that's what we've done ever since, answer questions and talk about things from history, talk about human nature through the lens of leadership in very stressful situations, which usually means some time of war or some sort of, catastrophic human suffering. And that's what the podcast is. So I just keep doing it. I have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of books stacked up that I need to do on the podcast. I've got hundreds and hundreds of people that I need to interview. And it's just an exploration into things that I'm interested in more than anything else. And I think that surprisingly, there was other people that have similar interests, because, the making a podcast, probably the worst intention you could go into a podcast with is, I'm going to talk about dark and horrible things for extended periods of time by myself in a dark room.
Yeah,
Right? That doesn't appeal to just about, you would think on the
you wouldn't
surface,
think, right?
you
Exactly.
wouldn't think that would appeal to anybody. And yet everybody knows that the world is a complicated and oftentimes very evil place, and people want to understand those things. And so that's what the podcast allows people to do, is experience things that they hopefully would not otherwise experience.
Yeah, I think there's a lesson in there, you know, you wanting to be able to explore some of these ideas and talk about some of these ideas without any restraints and have the freedom and flexibility to do it in your way. But you also listen to people who know it better than you, right? You listen to Ferris, who obviously is a monster in the game. You listen to Rogan, who's a monster in the game. Like, these are very reputable sources where you're getting information from. It's funny, I had somebody, I don't know, comment on Instagram or Twitter, wherever it was, and they were criticizing the idea that I had mentors. And I thought, man, how ridiculous is that thought, that there's somebody who actually believes that it's weak to find somebody who knows more than you in an avenue, in an area that you want to excel in, and then you solicit them, whether it's payment or just information, just for advice. It's fascinating to me that there's people who think that seeking out a mentor and doing what they say is weakness.
Yeah, that's a pretty silly idea. Yeah, and Tim and Joe, I mean, they recommended I start my own podcast, and Tim did it, you know, right after we got done recording. That was the first interview I ever did in my life. And when he pressed stop, he said, you should start your own podcast. And Joe said it during the middle of the podcast. And when those two guys tell you to start a podcast, it's probably a good thing to listen to.
It's actually been pretty cool to watch you evolve, because I haven't disclosed this to you, but the hardest interview I've ever done was the first interview I did with you. Because not only was I nervous, because I was fairly new in the game, I was nervous. I'd really appreciated and respected what you brought to the table, but you were just getting started. So I remember asking questions like, you know, how do you do X, Y, and Z? And your answer was, you just do it. And in my mind, I'm like, do you care to elaborate? You're like, no, you just do it. I'm like, how do I hold this conversation with this guy? I don't know how to do this. But one of the things I've really appreciated about you and seen over the past 4 to 5 years is your evolution and the way that you've evolved, the way that you communicate, the way that you share a message, inspire people. It's actually really cool to see that happen in real time over the past 5 years.
Yeah, I've gotten that feedback a couple times. I know I did one pretty high level interview one time, and someone else, another friend of mine that's also got interviewed by that same person like a short period after, and contacted me, and they said that the person that interviewed them said that I was the hardest interview they've ever done. So I don't know. I guess I apologize for being hard to interview.
No, I don't think you have to apologize. I think you learn from it, man. I think you grow from it. I think and of course I do too, right? I'm like, okay, I got to get better as an interviewer, right? Like, these are things that I need to improve upon as well. Yeah. Do you feel like your let me back up and say it this way. Do you take into consideration how other people perceive you? Because I know that there's a common trend in society. We hear this all the time of like the 0Fs mentality and like, I don't care what other people think. And yet from my perspective, I look at it as a leader, like, to some degree, I've got to care about what certain people think. You know, I care about what you think because I respect you. I care about what my wife, certainly what she thinks, and what my children think of me, because I need to be aware of that in order for me to lead them more effectively. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I've talked about that before. And yes, it's a dichotomy because, as you said, you know, you don't want to care about what people think, and then you're scrambling around afraid to do anything, or you don't stand up for what you actually believe in because you're afraid that people will think something less of you. So you don't want to care what people think from that perspective. But it's not the same way. The opposite perspective is, if you've got people that you respect and you care about, then you should care about how they feel about you. And as a leader, you know, that idea, which you can still find people saying this all the time today, you know, as a leader, you're not looking to be liked. Doesn't matter if you're liked. It just, you know, the leaders aren't meant to be liked. And like, no, actually not true. I would much rather have 10 people on my team that like me and respect me than 10 people on my team that don't like me. They might respect me, but they don't like me. Who's going to win? Are you kidding me? It's not even close. It's not even close. It's a complete landslide victory for me and my team that we all like each other versus the team that don't like each other. So yes, you have to pay attention and care about what people think. And at the same time, the dichotomy is if you run your life based on what other people think, you probably dig yourself a pretty deep hole pretty quick.
Well, I think people like to set up these false dichotomies, these black and white scenarios where it's like, well, you can either have people like you or respect you. It's like, nah, you can actually have both. Like, it isn't so black and white. There's some gray area there. There's some middle ground that you ought to probably operate and work in, and that's going to help you get things done more effectively than operating to the extremes where they either respect you but don't like you. I don't even know if that would work, or the opposite of that.
Yeah, that's the dichotomy of leadership, and you got to stay somewhere in the middle, stay somewhere balanced a vast majority of the time.
Yeah, yeah. That's the thing that I've noticed about just popular culture, even social media, is there's not much more room for nuance. And that goes back to the conversation we were having about podcasting earlier, the freedom, the flexibility, the lack of time constraints, is that we can talk about anything and everything without it being so black and white, and we can get into the crevices and the nuances of some of these discussions and these topics. And I think that's why this format, this medium of podcasting is so powerful.
Yeah, and I don't know if have you ever done any TV interviews?
No, never have.
You don't really perceive this when you watch them. And maybe even if you don't do any other kind of interviews, you wouldn't really perceive it. But when you do a television interview, it is a microsecond of thought that TV interview consists of. There's no time to assemble your thoughts. There's no time to actually think about what you're going to say. There's no time to articulate your way around a point to describe something in the most accurate possible way. None of that exists. You're on to spew out 3 or 4 sentences. They're pretty much going to be pre-planned. And then the bit is over. I mean, the bits they're like 4 minutes. They're 4 minutes. You get an introduction, you get, your biography, and then they ask you a question, you answer, they talk about it, they ask you one more question, you answer, and then it's over. It's actually crazy. And I don't think I haven't fallen apart during one of those interviews or anything, but it's just they're just kind of not very cool. And unfortunately, I think they cater to a short attention span, kind of lowest common denominator, that they figure, hey, if we bring someone on this broadcast that's boring or not popular or someone doesn't like, as long as we switch them out, there's like an anticipation that someone else is coming and I'll just stick with it. And I think that's what drives it. But it's a very strange medium, and it's a very shallow medium. And so to have the ability to do, a format like this it's amazing. And, I would go, my podcast, there's like millions of people listen to each episode. And so it's Echo and me sitting in a converted closet in my gym with $1,000 worth of gear. And I'll go out and do interviews where there's an entire production crew and a team and a back room and all these things, stage lights, and their viewership of a TV program will be 500,000 people. So the fact that anyone can get there on these little platforms and yet they reach so many people, it's a pretty amazing time to be alive.
It is amazing. We don't have quite the reach that you do, but even seeing the downloads and the people that connect with us and people who reach out, I'm like, man, I'm still blown away. I was walking around in another town on vacation with my family the other day, and somebody walked up and stopped me and said, hey, man, I listened to your show. And I'm like, my knee-jerk reaction is, why? Like, you listen to me? You know what I mean? But he came up and introduced himself and said he was inspired by what we're doing. And like the ability that we have to reach and connect with people unlike ever before is just, it's absolutely phenomenal. It's such a powerful medium, and something that people, I think, are really, really craving is these deep conversations. I want people to feel like they're in the, like, literally, and you and I have interviews where there are people literally in the room. That's how I want people to feel, like they're part of this conversation. I think it's a very powerful medium for that.
Yeah, and I bet even with however many people are listening to this, I bet you it's more than a lot of TV shows and news programs that are out there. And it's a cool thing.
Yeah, I also think it's actually part of the solution to the problems that we find ourselves in society. You know, I think for the past 10 years or so, maybe slightly longer, we have been conditioned to look for quick snippets and quick sound bites and 40 characters and 4 minute Fox News segments. And we've lost a lot of the nuance, and it's become so polarizing. And what I've realized is that as we have conversations like this, I think this is the solution, or at least part of the solution to the polarization that we see in society. I don't think all that many people are so far apart, but we've been polarized that way through social media and through these quick sound bites. Do you agree with
Yeah,
that?
absolutely. And I've been saying that if you want to resolve a conflict with somebody, you got to talk to them. You got to hear what their side is. You got to listen. You got to actually listen to see where they're right. And that's the biggest part, is how much ego plays into all this polarization that we're dealing with. So much of it comes from ego, because if you say something, well, I just think you're wrong, and I think I'm right, and I don't listen to anything else that you say. So how can we connect? How can we make any progress? How can we find any common ground if I just think I'm smarter and better than you and you're just too dumb to get it? Well, I'm never going to listen to you. So you have to put your ego in check and actually listen to what other people have to say. And even if you don't agree with it, you have to actually say to yourself, well, okay, why do they think that? Why do they think that? Why do they have that idea in their head? If I don't, if I don't listen to what you're saying, then every thought that I have about you is basically invalid. Unless I listen to what you say, I understand what your perspective is. I say, oh, Ryan's been through this, and Ryan experienced that, and Ryan has this thought because of this situation. How can I even address you? How can I even negate anything that you say if I'm not listening to what you say? And yet, that's what we do most of the time. We hear someone that's on the other side of the spectrum. We listen to two words come out of their mouth. We know where they're coming from. We shut them out. They're wrong. They're stupid. They're idiots. And we don't listen to another word they say.
I think
That's what America's doing right now.
yeah, it's on. I agree. I think it's just the dehumanization of it. You know, like for example, I probably have neighbors who I would disagree with on just about every front politically, but I have no idea because we don't talk about that stuff. We talk about their kids and we have barbecues together, and my friend comes over and helps me with a project because I need some help, and I might go over and lend a resource or lend my hand because he needs some help. And it's the humanity of it. You know, I see somebody, a friend, for example, who has a child that goes through cancer. Man, I don't care what political affiliation it's about. I'm like, dude, this guy has a daughter that has cancer right now. Like, what can I do to help? How can I help this individual? Like, forget about the politics. All politics aside, like, this is what needs to be addressed. And Twitter and Facebook and Instagram do a phenomenal job at stripping away the humanity. And look, I don't want to discount how powerful they are, because I don't think you and I would be having this conversation if those platforms weren't there. But I think we need to like disengage occasionally from the technological world and just like go have a barbecue with your neighbor, or go to jujitsu with your friend, or whatever. Just get face to face, which is a little difficult amid COVID-19 restrictions, but I think people can still get there.
Yeah, no doubt. You got to listen to what other people have to say, and don't wrap yourself around. See, even the things that you just talked about, each one of those things, whether your neighbor needs help with something, whether you need something from your neighbor, whether you're doing jujitsu, whether you're having a barbecue, all those things are common ground. And so when you build up all this common ground, if you find out that this guy doesn't believe some political belief that you believe, well, it's okay, because you've got everything else in common, so it's not that big of a deal. But
Right.
if you come out of the gate with what are your political beliefs, and by the way, I think you're wrong, and therefore everything that you do is wrong, and therefore I'm not going to have a barbecue with you because I don't want you near my chicken, and that's that. Game over. We're not talking to you. So,
What are
truth.
your yeah, what are your thoughts on politics in general, as far as like I know people have asked you and talked with you about getting into politics. Like what's your take on that, as far as you getting involved, you not getting involved, you getting involved at some point? Where are you at with that?
I don't want to be a politician. I just I have no desire to do that job. Just from the mechanics of the job, I don't want to do the job. I don't want to be sitting around in an office. I don't want to be, out shaking people's hands all day long. And, you know, I was thinking about this as you were telling me how hard it was to interview me when you first met me. And it's like, I'm thinking to myself, oh yeah, that's because I don't really like to talk to people, which is a really strange thing for me to say since I literally talk to people for a living, but I don't talk to people. It's not, you know, if I'm in a room and there's a bunch of people in there that are all talking, I don't feel the need to step up and talk to people all the time. So I also don't feel that need from, you know, like a political perspective of, hey, I'm going to go out and meet people and constantly try and win people's support over all day long, shaking hands and kissing babies. That's just not really my personality. So I hope I never have to do it. You know, the only thing that I think would ever come into play, and this is like a straight doomsday scenario, like if there was some kind of just epic disaster that unfolded, I would probably, not by choice, but through instinct and natural reaction, would move into a leadership position of trying to get a situation under control and moving forward. But I mean, I'm talking like doomsday scenario, then it probably would just be what I would do, because that's the way my mind works in situations like that. I really hope it doesn't come to that. And there's people who've heard me say that before, and they're like, what about right now? And I'm like, are you kidding me? We aren't even close. You got your iPhone, you know, you've got the internet, we've got Wi-Fi, we got the things that people are complaining about right now are not the kind of major issues that I'm talking about.
Well, and this goes back to our earlier conversation, is I think your level of reach is just as large as if you were some sort of politician. Like you have just as much influence, if not more, over the way people think and respond and react through your podcast and other platforms than any other politician out there. I mean, I wouldn't say you're political necessarily, but the reach is certainly there, and you're influencing people's behaviors for the positive. You know, you're there.
Yeah. You know, I've made some videos, and I was just on Rogan, and we obviously talked about some of this kind of stuff. And, you know, the feedback's generally positive, you know, because I talk about stuff sort of from a emotionally detached perspective, don't get super hype about stuff. I understand that there's two sides to every story. And even when I don't agree with the other side, I at least understand that they have a perspective that I might not understand. So I have to say, okay, well, what is it that's, I don't just cancel out anybody that doesn't align with what I'm thinking. In fact, I try and learn from them. So I think when you combine those things together, it comes across as a reasonable human being, which is, I think, rare in a lot of situations today. You know, people are more apt to just get crazy about things, and I try not to do that.
Why do you think people get that way? I mean, obviously their emotional responses and reactions, but why do people get there?
Yeah, I mean, well, I think a lot of it does have to do with ego and insecurities. You know, it's sort of like, you know, when someone's truly deeply insecure, and then that makes them hyper, you know, overconfident, egotistical, and you know that it's rooted in insecurity. I think some of it has to do with that. I think people, you know, everything that you talked about with the social media, and you know, I talked about this with Rogan. When somebody posts a video, every video that gets posted, you know, 9 out of 10 of them are to trigger reactions. And so when you go on social media, and by the way, your algorithm on social media is an echo chamber. The algorithm isn't set up to make you see the other side's views. It's only set up to make you see your own views. So when I look at, you know, my feed on social media, the world looks one way. If you go and look at some other person's feed on social media, the world will look completely different. And so when you get caught up inside your own social media echo chamber, and every video you see reflects what your thoughts already are, man, it's hard not to get spun up. The other thing is, social media brings an immediacy to everything that's happening in the world. And it's an immediacy that exponentially increases the visibility and the threat of whatever it is that's unfolding. So, you know, you can look at COVID-19. COVID-19, I know it's really bad. And if you watch the news or you watch social media, you'll see all this mayhem. You read the headlines, it's mayhem. I'll tell you, I mean, I live in San Diego. Bro, it's not that big of a deal here. I know I talked to Pete. Pete's like, yeah, it's not that big of a deal here.
It's not.
I get that it's a big deal in New York City. I get that it's a big deal in some major metropolitan areas, but we live in a massive country. You know, there's 350 million people that live here. 350 million people. That's a lot of people. You know, my house up in Montana, you go up there, you're flying over millions of square miles of just country where
Emptiness.
there's no people. And yet, if we have X amount of, sicknesses, and that's what you see on the news every day, you are going to think that that's what's happening and that's the most important thing in the world. And look, I'm not trying to denigrate or dismiss the fact that some people and some families have been hit in a horrendous way by this disease, especially people that have compromised immune systems or they're elderly. I mean, it's awful. And if you live in a family like that and COVID comes into your family, you could lose 2, 3, 4, 5 family members. And that's awful. But if you live in Southern California like I do, and my parents and my in-laws don't even live anywhere close to us, we have no friends over the age of, 50, which is what I'm 48, and my kids are all healthy kids. We're very blessed in that way. Well, then guess what? COVID doesn't have a huge impact on my personal life. On our business, it has an impact, and we adapt to those situations. But to answer your question, why do people become so emotional and polarized? It's because of what they are eating. It's what they are eating. And what they are eating is social media, crazy headlines. The headlines are all made. What do I need to write in this headline to get you to click on this headline? And by the way, when you click the headline, you're only going to read the first paragraph anyways. So what does that mean? The headline that says, Corona spikes all-time high. And you click on it and you read the first paragraph that says more people have Corona today than they ever have. And you're like, well, yeah, I guess. Well, if you think through it, you say, well, the disease is spreading. It's a virus. It's going to move throughout the population.
Makes sense.
Okay, I get it. That makes sense. But if you just see the headline, you think the world is coming to an end. And that is one of the reasons why people get super emotional and go crazy about things.
Yeah, I even caught myself this morning. I was reading some headlines or something on Instagram, and then you click on this and click on that, and before half an hour into the thing, you realize you're like, "What the hell am I doing here?" Like I'm wasting all this time. Like, how does this help me lead the people who are listening to my podcast? How does this help me with the people who are banded with us in some way? How does this help me lead my family? And more often than not, the solution or the answer to that question is it doesn't help in any way. In fact, it undermines my ability to perform and to be effective the way I want to be effective when I wake up first thing in the morning.
Yeah, and you can read anything any position you want to support for yourself, or let me rephrase that. Anything that you want to believe, you can find support for on the internet. So if you want to believe that COVID is no threat and it's not that big of a deal, you can find that. And if you want to believe that the world is going to come to an end because of COVID, you can find that too. You can support the absolute extremes on opposing sides of just about any argument there is. That's not going to be good.
No, like you said, that's the echo chamber, right? Is like, hey, here's my thought. I'm rooted in this belief. I'm not going to change my perspective, and so I have to find all the data that supports what I already believe. And what I find fascinating, look, I fall in this trap. I'm not saying I don't. But what I find fascinating is I try, and I've learned this over having, over, close to 600 podcasts at this point, and having conversations with men like you and other people who have joined us, is like, I just have to be open-minded. That's it. Like, that's my job, is to be open-minded and to be curious about what you have to say and how it might benefit me, how it might impact me, how it might benefit the people who are listening in. And that level of curiosity, I think, has really served me well. And I think it would serve a lot of other people well also, because they aren't curious. They're just trying to solidify what they already believe. It's like, no, go into a conversation curious about why. even if you don't agree with them, why that person thinks what they're thinking. And ultimately, you may walk away with the same perspective you had before, but at least you're considering something you haven't considered before. And that's very, very powerful. That rounds you out.
Yeah, I always talk about this from a leadership perspective, that if you work for me and you come to me with an idea, my goal when you start talking to me is to see that your idea is correct and my idea is wrong. Like if I have a plan on how we're going to do something and you object to my plan, when you object to my plan, my goal from that point forward is to say, why is his plan better than mine? That's what I want to figure out. Not, no, he's wrong and my plan is better than his. It's why does he have that plan? Why is it better than mine? How can we use his plan instead of my plan? That's what my goal is. So yes, if I go into a discussion with someone and I'm thinking, okay, well, I'm going to this, you have a certain belief and I know what your belief is, and I enter the conversation saying, how can you be right and I be wrong? That's going to allow me to open my mind up a lot more and understand the situation a lot better. And maybe I don't change my mind completely, but at a minimum, maybe I can understand someone else's perspective, and then I can start to address the root of their belief instead of just attacking them, which is what most people end up doing nowadays.
That's actually, I've never heard that before. Like that's taking it not from, hey, let me try to understand this person, to the extreme of, let me see if I can prove this person right. That's actually a really interesting perspective. I've never considered that before. And again, that goes back to what you were saying earlier, is ego, right? Like, I got to be right. I got to be right. No, you have to win. Like, you have to make more money. You have to serve more people. You have to lose more weight. You have to, whatever your goal is, that is the objective. And somebody else might have that one little insight that you've never heard of, like you just shared with me, that might actually help you achieve your objective. And that is the bottom line, not how can I be right as often as possible.
Yeah, and I just have to throw a little caution. I understood what you were saying, but when you go into a discussion with somebody, you said, I want to win, and you meant win in the broad sense of the term.
Correct.
Meaning I don't want to win. When you come to me with a plan, I don't want to win
the objective, not the debate.
Right. I want to win as a team, that we come up with the best plan. And if that plan happens to be yours, that's the plan I want to use because I want us to win. Yes, absolutely.
Right. Yeah. No, I'm glad you clarified that. What do you see going from here? I mean, obviously you've made big pivots. You're doing a lot more online, which has greatly enhanced, I imagine, your business and your efficiency, like you talked about earlier. Where do you see you going, and how do you decide that? That's the important question, because guys are thinking to themselves, my job isn't as secure as I once thought it was. Income isn't coming in. Like, how do I know where to go, and what am I looking for when it comes to pivoting?
So there's a term that gets used in the military, and I hate to use this term because it has some super negative connotations to it, clearly. But the term that you use in the military is exploit. And what happens is, you have an opportunity, and because you're talking about an enemy, then it doesn't really matter that you're trying to exploit opportunities where the enemy is weak. But it sounds bad when you say it in the civilian sector, that you're looking to exploit something.
Fortunately, with our audience, fortunately, we've got a smart audience. They understand nuance and they know what the hell we're talking about. We're not talking about taking advantage or at the expense of somebody else. They know that. So
when you're in the military, what you are constantly doing is you're constantly, doing reconnaissance and listening and paying attention and probing to find out where enemy weaknesses are so that you can exploit those weaknesses. And sometimes you send a reconnaissance team out and they think they find something and they start to go down it, and maybe you send an assault team there to start giving them some backup, and maybe they're able to penetrate and exploit that weakness. Or maybe they get there and they meet some harder resistance than they expected, and you back out, you try something else. That's basically how I operate my life. Is I am very open-minded. I'm constantly probing and paying attention. I have an open mind, listening, doing reconnaissance, sending reconnaissance teams out, getting feedback, running feedback loops, and paying attention to what the feedback that I get is. And if I find a weakness, or I find an opening, or I find an opportunity, I guess that's the word we could use for the civilian sector. If I find an opportunity, it presents itself, then I will start to concentrate forces and resources into that opportunity. If that opportunity continues to develop, I'll continue to put resources into that opportunity. If it continues to develop, I'll put more resources in there. If at some point I say, opportunity is not what I thought it was, I have no problem at all saying I was wrong, bad opportunity. I'm going to take those resources out and I'm going to put them somewhere else. So that is how I operate. I do the same thing that I did in the military, which is pay constant attention to what is going on around me, put reconnaissance out there, pay attention, put resources into things, not expect anything in return. If I do get something in return, maybe I put some more resources there. If it turns out to be good, I'll continue to press that opportunity until it either comes to a greater fruition or it comes to a point where I say, okay, this isn't what I thought it was, and no problem. I'm going to retract my resources and apply them somewhere else.
Yeah, that's good, because I think a lot of guys, what they believe is that if they take a step towards some path, A, B, or C, that they're fully vested. It's like, no, you're just taking one step. And if it presents itself even more, another, then another, then another. And then you can always backtrack or take another path if that opens up and that opportunity opens up. I have the luxury, I will say, of seeing like the dynamic duo that is Jocko and Pete. And I see this every day. And even though Pete and I talk about every other day, he'll post something on Instagram like, dude, we were talking like 24 hours ago and you like, now you have this thing built. Like you didn't even like slightly allude to that. And he's like, yeah, I wasn't thinking about it then. I'm like, that was 24 hours ago. And so it's actually really powerful to see you guys operate and how quickly you guys put this stuff into action. And I like that you talked about exploiting opportunities, right? You're not exploiting people, you're exploiting opportunities and seeing what presents itself. I actually had a similar experience. We've got this battle planner for men that men are using. It's been very successful. They've had a lot of success with it. And my son came to me several months ago and he's like, hey, Dad, can I use one of those? And I'm like, I don't know. Like, I don't think this is for you, but like, why don't we create something for you? And so him and I sat down and we actually created something for him and we're making it available in 30 days. I know it's going to do very, very well, but that's a perfect example of an opportunity that's there. I didn't recognize it for whatever reason before. My son is the one who presented it to me. And here we are stepping into something. Maybe it pans out, maybe it doesn't, but we're going to try it and we're going to see how it does.
You print some copies, you see how those do. If they do, then you get some more copies made. Maybe you put a little bit more behind them. And that's exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah, man, it's good. It's exciting. It's exciting times. That's what I look at now is like, I think a lot of people are worried and frustrated and concerned. And certainly there's things to be upset and concerned about. But not to the point of inaction and not to the point of retreat, but to the point of, all right, well, where do we pivot? Where do we change? How do we evolve? How do we get better because of it?
Yeah. And you got to take your ego out of the equation. And I know that's one of the interesting things about working with Pete is we make big decisions with no ego whatsoever. And I think one of the funniest things to talk about is, Pete is a designer, right? He's an artistic designer guy. Yes. And he has some personal pride around that. Like he likes to do that. He went to college for it. He went to college for art design. That's his thing. He's great at a bunch of other things too, but that's like, he likes doing that stuff and he's proud of it. And when we're, let's say, designing a package, let's say we're designing a package for something, a can or a bottle or a label or whatever. And he'll send me, say, hey, what do you think of this? And I'll be like, too much color here, whatever. And he doesn't take any offense to it whatsoever. And maybe he'll come back and say, I don't know, here's why I did that. And I'll say, oh, I didn't know that you did it for that reason. I didn't understand that. Now that I understand it. But we will come up with whole battle plans in a matter of, 7 text messages. We won't even talk to each other. It'll be text messages where, he sends me an image of something. I say, do a little bit of this to it, or that to it. He sends it back with those adjustments. I say, you know what? I was wrong. It doesn't look as good as I thought it would. Change it back to what you had. And this has, when you talk about the the speed with which we move, a lot of that is because we are only looking for solutions. We don't have any agenda. We're able to communicate to each other very quickly, very bluntly, with no emotions and no ego whatsoever. And it makes everything very, very powerful. And it's the same thing with Brian over in Fuels, because, I'll say, hey, Brian, I don't like the way this tastes, or hey, Brian, this consistency is wrong, or hey, Brian, and he's like, cool, working it. Cool, I'm working it. And that's just the way it is. He's not saying, well, you don't understand this, or I think that. Now, it's not saying he won't give me his opinion. And both those guys, they'll give me their opinion all day long. And the reason they'll give me their opinion all day long is they know that I actually respect and yearn to hear their opinion, because I don't think I'm right all the time. I think, you know what, here's what I think, but I know I can be wrong. I know I can absolutely have the wrong idea in my head. And so I want to get pushback from people. I don't want people that are just yes men talking to me. I don't want followers following me. I want people working with me. And that's what I end up with.
So I think, obviously with Pete and Brian as well, you built that relationship to the point where you've earned, for lack of a better term, the capital to be able to say, no, I like this. No, I don't like this. Change this, tweak this. Because you've proven to them that it's not an ego thing. It's like, let's win this thing collectively, right? Let's win this objective. But how do you approach people that maybe you haven't had the opportunity to build that relationship with? And how do you strike the balance between offering encouragement versus giving constructive criticism and feedback that will help the team move forward? Because I think a lot of people might initially interpret that differently than you intended.
Which part do you think they would interpret differently than I intended?
Not you specifically, but I think that if somebody offers any sort of criticism, I think they may have a tendency in a lot of cases to take it personally rather than believe that it will help the team. And that's why we're giving the feedback we're giving.
So you're saying people might give too harsh of criticism because of what I just...
Well, I'm saying, let me give you an example. I'll back up and give you an example. Let's say we've got a new leader, brand new leader in an organization, and he's got a project that he's working on. And the project isn't going as well as it should, or hopefully it will go, or trying to meet deadlines or whatever it is. And that leader comes and offers criticism that will actually propel the project forward, but the people he's criticizing are interpreting that incorrectly, or maybe interpreting it correctly and it's just coming across too harsh. Like, how do you know what the right amount of criticism is to give, and how do you approach that criticism?
Yeah. So when you're in a situation like that, first of all, we have to assume that everybody that we talk to are going to be offended by what we say to them when it comes to giving them criticism. That's the standard that we have to go with, because that's what is most common. What is most common, if I say, hey, Ryan, your podcast, you can get real verbose during it. Now, look, I might mean that like, hey, I'm just trying to help you out. It doesn't matter, man. You've done 600 episodes. You've got whatever following you've got. You've put your heart and soul into this thing. You're going to be mad that I said that. You're going to be offended by the fact that I said that. If I say, hey, your podcast, you talk about the same things over and over again. And by the way, I'm just giving critiques that anyone could give to my podcast as well. I talk about the same things.
I'm actually wondering, like, oh shit, like, is this criticism? Like, should I be writing this stuff down?
Well, it's what anyone could say about my podcast as well, which is your podcast is too long, you talk too much, and you talk about the war all the time. No one wants to hear that. Or so these are all. But guess what? When I hear that. So like you said, what's your natural reaction? Your natural reaction is that you bristle up and you say,
of course,
you don't know what you're talking about. You're just new here. Going back to your example, you're just new here. You don't know how it works. You don't understand this project. You don't have the knowledge that we have. Shut up. We're going to keep doing it this way. So what you have to do is approach people like you are approaching a worst case scenario, which is their ego is going to take offense to what you're going to say. So now what you have to do is communicate with them in a way that disarms their ego. How do you do that? Number one, easiest lesson to do is take ownership of what you're about to say. So instead of me saying, hey, hey, Ryan, the way you're running this project, what would be a good thing? The way you're running this project, you're not ordering supplies early enough. And that's why you're behind schedule. So that's what am I doing when I say that to you? I'm attacking you. Instead, if I come to you and say, hey, Ryan, I noticed that the supplies that you need for the project, they're not getting there in time. Is there anything I could do that would help facilitate you getting what you need since you're the point person on this project? It's a totally different conversation, right? And now instead of being, I took ownership of it. And by the way, I mean, I talk about all this stuff in leadership strategy and tactics. The reason I wrote leadership strategy and tactics is because I realized that when I talk about the principles of leadership and extreme ownership and the dichotomy of leadership, the principles are very clear. And I work with people all the time that understand the principles, but they don't actually understand how to put those principles
how to apply
into
them.
action.
Sure.
And so leadership strategy and tactics, I actually have, examples of what to say in situations like what you're talking about. How do you soften the approach? How do you use an indirect approach instead of a direct approach? Because just like combat, the direct approach, the frontal assault, is the worst option you can take. Even though it takes the most courage, and even though it's the boldest, it is the worst option that you can take 99% of the time. So what does that mean? You want to take an indirect approach. How do you do that? You need to think about what you're going to say. You need to think about how you communicate with people. So to this example, that's what you do. You take an indirect approach. You figure out how you can communicate with someone in a way that it doesn't offend them. It opens their mind. It allows them to be open for suggestion. You can even plant seeds into their brain where they think that the idea that you put in their brain is their own. That's what you want to do.
And when they take credit for them, say good job type thing, like right on, let's get this done.
When they take credit, you cheer them on and you say, yes, absolutely. Great job.
It's powerful, man. I think I got it up there somewhere. I know it's up there somewhere. The leadership strategy and tactics is up there somewhere in those books. So I've got them all, man. I've got them all.
Right on.
Jocko, I appreciate you. Hey, I was going to ask as we wind things down, we're going to shoot some more arrows come fall for immersion camp.
Well, I don't know if you've heard yet, but immersion camp is canceled.
Apparently, I have not heard yet. See, you see how quickly things change with Pete.
Immersion camp is canceled.
Bummer.
We held on as long as we could. We tried to figure out if there was a feasible way to do this. And the bottom line, with the rules that are in place, it's just not possible. It's not possible.
Maine's rough.
It is not possible to do a jiu-jitsu camp within the rules. And it's also impossible to take 400 or 500 people from around the country to travel to a location in airplanes and all get together and sweat and spit and slobber on each other over and over again and think that we're going to get out of that without spreading this virus. So, we had to make the call. And so there'll be no immersion camp. That being said, I may be coming to Maine anyways. Pete and Brian and I have some business to handle in the coming months. And so if I do come, I'll bring my bow and we can shoot some bow and arrow.
I gotta see that new custom build by the one and only John Dudley. It looks pretty solid. You've been practicing quite a bit with that thing?
Yeah, I've got a nice little spot at my house here in California where I can get out to about 42 yards. Nothing crazy, but it's enough to hit your reps every day. And yeah, that's what I do. I go out, I shoot a bunch of arrows every day, just trying to keep it dialed, relax my brain a little bit, relax my eyesight a little bit from staring at screens from my job, and let it go.
That's one of the things that's pretty powerful in just watching you, casually observing on social media. And of course, our conversations is seeing, okay, jiu-jitsu every day, working out every day, shooting the arrows every day. Like these are things that are non-negotiables. And I think if it's important, you'll do it every single day. And you exhibit that very well. I think it's very influential and inspirational to other people who want to embed these things into their routines.
Yeah, you got to make time. You got to make time. Time doesn't put itself on your calendar to do things like take care of yourself. And you got to put some time on there, because if you lose that, you can't take care of anyone else.
Well, it's interesting when you say that. I think this is where language is very important, because what I hear a lot of people say is, I just don't have the time. No, you have the time, because I have the time. Jocko, you have the time. So it's there. It's just not a priority. And that's fine. If it's not a priority, at least say that. But don't say you don't have the time. Just prioritize it the right way.
No doubt. No doubt. You can figure out time. I won't put a percentage on it. The vast majority of people in the world can find a little bit more time in their day. And if that means 20 minutes to go shoot 20 arrows or 15 arrows, cool. If that means 15 minutes to go do some burpees or some pull-ups, you can find that time if you want it.
Yes, sir. All right, Jocko, we'll let you go on, let you get going. I do appreciate you as always. I've always appreciated our conversations, and they get easier every time. It's not as challenging as that first one was. So I'll put that on both of us. We've both improved. But just want to let you know, Jocko, that I appreciate you and everything you stand for and how you've inspired me. Thanks a lot, man.
Right on, man. Appreciate it. Good talking to you, and hopefully I'll see you up in Maine.
Yep, we'll get some arrows downrange.
Right on.